We talk a lot about bias in recruiting, but how much do we actually know about what's really happening? With AI-related lawsuits now putting hiring under intense scrutiny, how do we close that gap between perception and reality? Keep listening to find out. Support for this podcast comes from Mackie. Mackie enables businesses to build intelligent, science-backed hiring strategies that predict on-the-job performance and adapt as roles and markets change. Companies today face a surge of undifferentiated AI-inflated CVs and often rely on manual screening or inconsistent processes. This leads to missed talent, weaker performance, and a poor candidate experience. Mackie combines science-based assessments, behavioural signals, and autonomous AI agents into one integrated engine. It evaluates every candidate, predicts who will succeed, and continuously improves hiring outcomes. Teams hire faster, more fairly, and at a lower cost, while delivering stronger on-the-job performance and a better experience for candidates and customers. To find out more, you can go to mackiepeople.com. And Mackie is spelled M-A-K-I. And that's mackiepeople.com.
There's been more of scientific discovery, more of technical advancement and material progress in your lifetime and mine than in all the ages of history.
Hi there, welcome to episode 763 of Recruiting Future with me, Matt Alder. Bias in hiring has been a topic of discussion for decades, yet our understanding of what actually happens within the recruiting process remains surprisingly limited. Most research focuses on single types of bias in isolation, making it impossible to build a complete picture. Meanwhile, the arrival of AI tools is intensifying the scrutiny on hiring decisions, demanding a level of accountability that many organisations simply aren't prepared for. TA leaders often assume they know where bias exists in their processes. But what if those assumptions are wrong? What if the patterns are more complex and counterintuitive than anyone expected? My guest this week is Bas van der Haterd, co-founder of the TA Audit Institute. In our conversation, he shares findings from new research that challenges conventional thinking about where bias actually occurs and reveals how much we still don't know. Hi, Bas, and welcome back to the podcast.
Great to be here again, Matt.
Now, you've literally only a couple of weeks since you were last on, but in our chat before we started recording last time, you told me about some more research that you'd done. Last time we were talking about career sites, but this is kind of really interesting stuff. So I was really keen to get you back on the show to talk about it. Before we kind of dive in, can you quickly introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do in case they've not heard you on the show before?
Of course. My name is Bas van der Haterd, and for this specific topic, I think it's best to introduce myself as the co-founder of the TA Audit Institute, which audits major corporations on potential bias and labor market discrimination and tells them where it is. And I am also the co-host of a new podcast together with Dr. Charles Handler, who's one of the American experts when it comes to selection, and it's called the Global Talent Podcast, GTP.
Fantastic. So tell us about this particular sort of piece of research on bias that you've done. Why did you do it and how did you do it?
Well, together with my co-founders of TA Audit Institute, we figured, why don't we look at how much bias is there really? One of the main reasons that we really wanted to do this is to answer the question, which bias is most common? So people always complain about age bias, but in the Netherlands, there's been very little real research on that. And is that more common than, for example, ethnic bias? And how does gender bias fall into this? So we've never seen an actual research being done on all three biases at once, which makes them comparable. That was my personal reason I really wanted to do this. Yeah. And then we just needed data to show that there still is bias for our product, to be honest.
Cool. So talk us through, how did the research work?
Well, the research is actually quite simple. We looked at about 250 of the major organizations, both government as big corporate enterprises, and we applied with similar resumes. So resumes that were equally qualified, with the only difference being age, so usually 30 and above 50, 55, gender, man and woman, or ethnicity, which is signaled by the name, so a typical Dutch name versus an Arabic name.
And how do you make sure that's sort of robust? Because it sounds like there's kind of lots of variables there. What did you do in the design to make sure you were isolating the right biases, as it were?
Well, those are the only things which really differed. And for the rest, the level of experience was differed only with a maximum of 1 or sometimes 2 years if it's over 20 years of experience. So with age, what we did was you go up faster as a younger candidate, and we made sure that everybody fit all the requirements in the job description.
And obviously, a lot of research comes out of universities, academic bodies, institutes around bias and things like that. What was different about the way that you did this?
Well, first of all, we did it so in a similar way for all 3 biases at once, and especially here in the Netherlands, the academic research only looks at one bias. And because every research is done a little bit differently, you can't really compare them. The other main difference is that we went to the corporate careers websites of all these companies, and we didn't go to Indeed or another job board. So we only took the biggest of organizations, the most well-known organizations, and we went to the corporate career sites, which also means that if there's jobs on there which aren't advertised, and we all know that some corporates have, it would be really amazing if somebody ever applied to this job, but we're not going to spend money on them. So we had a little bit of a different set of jobs on which we applied.
So talk us through the results, because I know that you found some of the findings quite surprising.
So the main thing is the question that has been unanswered for ages is which bias is most common. It's the age bias. So 48% of our age-related paired applies, as they're called in academia, came back not equally treated. So an equally treated means both are invited, both are rejected, both got a phone call, and there's a certain hierarchy, of course, in that. Gender was second with 45%, and ethnicity was 38%, which were unequally treated. So that was the first result. Yep. Age is the most prevalent bias. But the weirdest thing was when we looked at the direction of the bias, on both ethnic and gender, there was almost zero net bias, which means that those 45% of gender different CVs which weren't equally treated, literally half of them, the men got preferential treatment, and half of them, the woman got preferential treatment. Almost the same for ethnic bias, but the weirdest one was actually the age bias, where in 2/3 of the sample, the younger candidate got a lesser response than the older candidate. So the older candidate got invited, while the younger candidate didn't.
Let's start with the age thing. That is interesting because there is obviously, so many people are experiencing age-related bias from the older perspective, as it were, and we often hear about it from the kind of entry-level perspective. But do you have any kind of insights into what's going on here with those kind of results, or what might be happening that's different to the perception of what we think is happening?
The question is it different than what we think is happening, or is this specific to the way we did the research? Because we only looked at jobs where the older candidate would be perfect also to apply for. So older CVs are usually sent to people with more senior levels. So a minimum of, 10 years of experience is required, for example. The other thing where I think we differ, and I would love to do another research on this, is we made sure that the younger candidate just grew into a certain position. So, for example, if we're applying at manager jobs, the younger candidate took 10 years to become a team lead, and the older candidate took 30 years to become a team lead.
Yeah, interesting.
But they still grew throughout their career. The people I hear complaining about it a lot are people who've been at the same job level for 20 or 30 years. And we didn't really measure that. So there might be some form of hiatus there. Like if you've been, we only had a few of them, so it's not representative. And we saw positive and negative results on those as well. But if you've been like, a newspaper editor for 25 years, does that, and you apply it for a new newspaper editor position, how does age discrimination look then? That's something all of our people kept on growing in their career.
Yeah. And I suppose that, with all the talk that's out there about skills-based hiring, in this particular sort of framing of it is kind of really indicating that those employers are valuing either consciously or subconsciously experience over anything else as a sort of defining factor.
Yeah, and it's but it's also the way and the sort of experience, I guess. It's you can be very experienced, but if you're only very experienced in one specific thing, are you really that experienced if you haven't shown any growth? I think they're looking at it from that kind of perspective. But we were extremely surprised with these results, to be honest.
And talk us through the gender and the ethnicity part of it as well. What do you kind of think is going on there, or how have you sort of rationalized the results that you got?
Honestly, I can't rationalize them. It's just what we see is what we see, and we see that the net discrimination was almost none. I actually made at some point a hypothesis, especially with ethnic discrimination, that it might be that the profit companies might be discriminating and the non-profits might be positively discriminating, as they used to call it here, the ethnic minorities. But that wasn't the case either. So I think I know that in Flanders, in Belgium, there was a research where it showed that with every doubling of a company size, the discrimination dropped by, I think, 6% or something. Since we only took the biggest companies and there's a decent sized non-profit in there, it might be that we just got lucky, or it might be that for only these specific companies, they're just not discriminating anymore in net terms, because they're still discriminating. And I still think that positive discrimination is as much discrimination, of course. And you should have an equal treatment wherever you apply. But for the entire labor market, we didn't see this right now.
And does it sort of tell us that we tend to sort of look at bias as, something that's institutionalized? It's like, across the whole of a company's recruiting process. But could this perhaps tell us the influence of individual hiring managers in terms of what happened?
The thing is, I don't know who made the decision, if it's the hiring manager or the recruiter. And the way it's usually structured, a lot of it is also on the recruiter, I think. Yeah. Does it have to do with the individuals? Without a doubt. Is it institutionalized? Well, let's be very honest, Matt. Eventually, 44% of all the equal resumes were not equally treated. So there is an institutionalized bias. It just goes everywhere. It's not a one-directional bias. It's not anymore that women get discriminated against. Apparently, men get discriminated against equally. I would love to see, for example, at some point, I know in Switzerland, there was a really great research on this, where if it's typical male jobs, women now have decent chances, but in typical female jobs, so the 5 jobs which are most occupied by women, like childcare, men don't stand a chance. We haven't seen that in the Netherlands. I don't know how our research would pin that out. We did try to get some in there, like male secretaries and stuff like that, but not enough to say with any certainty was it correct. But the few ones we tried, both of them either got invited or rejected.
What are the practical implications of the findings that you've got here? I mean, how would you sort of take them back to the employers in terms of advising how they can improve their hiring or what they can do differently?
The first thing I want to mention as well is that 47% of all the organizations which we researched did not have any bias. So all of this bias comes close from half of the population, half of the organizations. Almost the other half is bias-free. Which could, of course, be because they just all kept rejecting us. I was recently talking to one company, and she said, "Yeah, you guys, we mentioned the jobs because we were evaluating the results with her, and she says, yeah, you only took jobs with 500 applicants each. So yeah, every one of us got rejected, but then both of them got rejected, so it's not biased." But over half of them actually are doing a pretty good job, which surprised the hell out of me. And I can tell you, every TA leader I spoke about was surprised as well that they passed the test, so to say.
Which also kind of speaks volumes in terms of people having a proper kind of grip on this, if that makes sense. If people don't know that they're actually good at not being biased, it that sort of indicates that perhaps we just don't have enough of a kind of a grasp on what's kind of happening in recruiting when it comes to bias.
I think, at least in the Netherlands, the TA leaders I talk to, which is most of them, they are actually so aware that their processes aren't perfect or aren't great yet, that they're unaware of how much they already improved and how much small improvements can make a difference.
It's kind of a really positive message, isn't it? Because I think that a lot of the talk of bias in recruitment is always on that other 50%, the process is biased and all these kind of things. But if companies are doing good work on it, then it should be celebrated.
Exactly. And I think that especially, I don't know about other countries, but the TA leaders I know in Britain are pretty much the same. They have been so focused on we need to do better, we know we weren't great, that they're now in a mode where they're like, we still need to do better because I haven't achieved all of my goals. And let's be honest, 44% of all the applications we sent weren't equally treated. So there's still a lot of room for improvement as well. But the companies that are really screwing up, to be honest, only 2% of all the organizations we researched had all 3 types of bias.
Right, okay.
So most of them are doing, or almost half of them are doing really okay. Now, back to your other question, how do we go about this? Well, start by simply implementing the basic things where we all know a structured system of doing job requirements. We know that actually with a structured approach to looking at CVs already helps a lot.
Final question to you. Where does this go next? Where are you taking the research next? How is it going to develop?
Well, right now, Matt, we are talking to a lot of companies where we're saying like, okay, do you want your own personal audit? And then I can tell you, you've got, I don't know, gender bias in sales or ethnic bias in IT or age bias in marketing. I don't know what pops up for you. And then you can look at it more specifically. You've got the data. I have one client, a potential client I'm talking to, who said like, listen, I know I've got a hiring manager over there who's ethnically very biased. And I've tried to escalate it a few times to the C-suite, but every time he has a story why that candidate shouldn't be hired. And I, as a TA lead, am now getting problems with not delivering enough quality candidates because he keeps rejecting everybody with an Arabic name. So with your data, I can finally get this done internally. But yeah, there's a lot of companies that are just really interested now to know, like, where are we? And how can we now have targeted interventions?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it makes perfect sense from that perspective. Bas, thank you very much for talking to me.
Always a pleasure, Matt.
My thanks to Bas. You can follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can search all the past episodes at recruitingfuture.com. On that site, you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter, Recruiting Future Feast, and get the inside track on everything that's coming up on the show. Thanks very much for listening. I'll be back next time, and I hope you'll join me.
This is my show.